Happy Halloween everyone, and as we all know, around this time of year, the barrier between our world and the world of the damned, the spiritual, the mischievous and haunted begin to fade, allowing some not so nice things to cross over into our world. Tonight we will be covering 3 stories, each of them unique and horrifying in their own way, and each of them spooky enough for a Halloween night. Be prepared to have your wits shaken, your heart racing, and your breath taken away. So, grab a drink. My choice today is Tears of the Innocent. A bit salty. And join me as we explore these haunting, chilling Halloween tales. Rawhead and Bloody Bones. Way back in the deep dark woods, there lived a scrawny old woman who had a reputation for being the best conjurer in the entire county. She had knotted black and grey hair, funny eyes, one yellow, one green, and a large crooked nose. She was not a pretty picture, but she was the best at curing people of whatever ailed them, and that was all that mattered. Old Betty's house was filled with herbs and roots and bottles of conjuring potions. The walls were lined with strange books, brimming with magic spells, and Old Betty was the only one in the entire hollow who knew how to read. Her granny, who was also a conjurer, had taught her that skill as part of her magical training, and just about the only true friend that Old Betty had was a tough, mean, old, ugly razorback hog that basically lived in her place and ran it a little bit wild. It rooted around all of her old, thrown out leftover potions and all of her garbage and rubbish, that a few of the thrown out concoctions started to affect it. Some folks swore up and down that the old razorback would sometimes walk on 2 legs, and one man claimed that he saw the old pig sitting in the rocking chair on Old Betty's porch as she was inside mixing up potions. But nobody really believed that last story, as the guy who told it was known to have somewhat of a fondness, shall we say, for moonshine. So Rawhead was the name that Old Betty gave to her razorback, perhaps referring to the way that the ugly hog sometimes looked like a dead pig, and one that was ready for butchering down by the hog-skulled hollow. But the razorback didn't mind this funny name. Rawhead stayed by Old Betty and continued to live around her little cabin, always rooting up her leftovers. He would even walk into town with her when she came in to sell her medicine. And well, the town got so used to seeing Old Betty and Rawhead together that it looked mighty strange when Old Betty came into town one day and Rawhead was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Rawhead?" one man asked, as he accepted a basket full of potions. As Old Betty handed over the basket, the liquid in the bottle swished around, and Old Betty said, "I ain't seen him around today. And to tell you the truth, I'm mighty worried. You haven't seen him here in town?" "Nobody's seen him around today. They would have told me if they did," the man said. "We'll keep a lookout for you." "That is mighty kind of you," Old Betty said. "If you see him, tell him to come home straight away." The man nodded in agreement as he handed over her weekly pay. Old Betty fussed to herself all the way home. It wasn't like Rawhead to just disappear, especially on the day that they were going into town. The man in town always saved the best scraps for the mean old razorback, and Rawhead never missed a visit. When Old Betty got home, she mixed up a potion and poured it out flat on a plate. "Where's that old hog got to?" she asked the liquid. It clouded over on the plate, and then a series of pictures formed. First, Old Betty saw the good-for-nothing hunter that lived over on the next ridge. He was sneaking around the forest and rounding up razorback hogs that didn't belong to him, and one of these hogs was Rawhead. Then she saw him taking the hogs down to Hog-Skulled Hollow, where the folks from the next town were slaughtering them. She saw her hog, Rawhead, slaughtered with the rest of the pigs and hung up ready for gutting. The final picture in the liquid was a pile of bloody bones that had once been her hog, and his scraped clean head lying with the other hogs' heads in a pile. Old Betty was infuriated by the death of her only friend. It was murder to her, plain and simple. Everyone in 3 counties knew that Rawhead was her friend, and that lazy, hog-stealing, good-for-nothing hunter on the ridge was going to pay for slaughtering him. Now, old Betty tried to practice white conjuring most of the time, but she knew the dark secrets too. She pulled out an old secret dark book that her granny had given her, and she turned to the very last page. She lit several candles and put them around the plate containing the liquid image of Rawhead and his bloody bones. Then she began to chant, "Rawhead and bloody bones, Rawhead and bloody bones, Rawhead and bloody bones." The light from the windows disappeared, as if the sun had been snuffed out like a candle. Dark clouds billowed into the clearing where old Betty's cabin stood, and the howl of dark spirits could be heard in the wind that pummeled the treetops. Rawhead and bloody bones, Rawhead and bloody bones. Betty continued this chant until a silver lightning bolt left the plate and shot out through the window, heading in the direction of Hogscold Hollow. When the silver light struck Rawhead's severed head, which was piled on the hunter's wagon with all the other heads, it tumbled off the cart and rolled all the way until it was touching the old bloody bones that had once inhabited its body. As the hunter's wagon rumbled away to where the hunter lived, the enchanted Rawhead called out, "Bloody bones, get up and dance." Immediately, the bloody bones reassembled themselves into the skeleton of a razorback hog walking upright, as Rawhead had often done when he was alone with Betty. The hog's head hopped on top of his skeleton and went off searching through the woods for weapons to use against the hunter. He borrowed the sharp teeth of a dying panther, the claws of a long-dead bear, and the tail from a rotting raccoon, and put them over his skinned head and bloody bones. Then Rawhead headed up the track towards the ridge, looking for the hunter who had slaughtered him. Rawhead caught up to the hunter and snuck past him, slipping into the hunter's barn where he kept his horse and wagon. He climbed up into the loft of the barn and waited for the hunter to come home. It was dusk when the hunter arrived home. He drove into his barn, unhitched his horse, and the horse snorted in fear, sensing the presence of Rawhead in the loft. Wondering what was disturbing his usually calm horse, the hunter looked around and saw a large pair of eyes staring down at him from the darkness of the loft. The hunter frowned, thinking it was one of the local kids playing a prank on him. "Oh gosh, what have you got those big eyes for?" the hunter said, thinking the kids were trying to scare him with some crazy mask. "To see your grave," Rawhead mumbled very softly. The hunter snorted irritably and put his horse into the stall. "Very funny, ha ha," the hunter said. When he came out of the stall, he noticed that Rawhead had crept a little bit further. Now his luminous yellow eyes and bare claws could be seen quite clearly. "Oh gosh, what have you got those big claws for? You look ridiculous," he said. "To dig your grave," Rawhead said softly. This made the hairs on the back of the hunter's neck stand up. He stirred uneasily, not sure how the crazy kid in his loft could have made such a scary sound, if this really was a kid. Feeling a little spooked, he hurried to the door and let himself out of the barn. Rawhead slipped out of the loft as well and climbed down the side of the barn behind him. Making hardly a sound, Rawhead raced through the trees and up the path to a large moonlit rock. He hid in the silhouette of this large stone, so the only things showing were his gleaming yellow eyes, his bear claws, and his raccoon tail. When the hunter came level with the rock on the side of the path, he gave a startled scream. He stared at Rawhead and said, "You nearly knocked the heart out of me, you crazy kid. And what have you got that crazy tail for?" "To sweep your grave," Rawhead said softly. The hunter took to his heels and ran to his cabin. But Rawhead was faster. When the hunter reached his porch, Rawhead jumped out of the shadows and loomed above him. The hunter stared in terror up at Rawhead's yellow gleaming eyes and his bloody bony skeleton with sharp panther teeth, long bare claws, and his sweeping raccoon's tail. "Oh gosh, what have you got those big teeth for?" he said desperately, stumbling backwards from the terrifying figure in front of him. "To eat you up, like you wanted to eat me," Rawhead roared, descending on the good-for-nothing hunter. The murdering thief gave one last long scream into the moonlight, and then there was only silence and the sound of crunching. Nothing more was ever seen or heard of the lazy hunter that lived on the ridge. His horse also disappeared that night, but some folks said they would see Rawhead sometimes roaming through the forests with his old friend Betty. And once a night, on the night of the full moon, Rawhead would ride through town on the hunter's horse, wearing the old man's bloody overalls draped over his skeletal body, with a hole cut out for his raccoon tail. In his bloody, bare-clawed hands, he carried his raw razorback hogshead, lifting it high against the full moon for everyone to see. And that is that. The future. She was nervous and excited as she approached the psychic's store. Normally, she didn't go in for fortune telling, but her best friend had visited the psychic months ago, and everything she predicted came true. The new boyfriend, the new job, the marriage proposal, a small win in the local lottery. Obviously, this psychic was a genius. The room she entered was surprisingly open and pleasant. She smelled coffee in the air, fresh flowers were on a stand by the window. She smiled to herself. Somehow she had pictured an old gypsy's caravan and a dark-haired woman in flowing robes. But the young, clean woman approaching her didn't look psychic at all. They sat down at the table and the woman did a reading of her palm. The psychic frowned a bit in concentration. Then the psychic asked if she would like a tarot card reading, free of charge. That was different to what had happened to her best friend. For a moment she felt a slight trace of uneasiness. Then she shrugged and said okay. The psychic studied the cards carefully and then looked again at the lady's palm. Then the psychic looked up into the lady's eyes, noticed she was a bit nervous, and said reassuringly, "Don't worry, my dear. Your future is very clear. I've recently changed my policies and now put these predictions in a sealed envelope. So you can take this and read it in the privacy of your own home." The lady blinked a bit, but was impressed. It kind of made sense after all. The psychic had asked her no questions, just read her palm and the cards. So any prediction that she put into the envelope would be proof of her powers. The psychic hurried into the back room where the lady could hear the faint sounds of pens and paper. Then the psychic returned with an envelope. "Thank you," she said to the psychic, and she shook her hand. She then hurried to her car, eager to get home and read the prediction in this envelope. What would the predictions be? A rich husband, a career change, travel to exotic places? Who knows? She had just pulled into the fast lane of the highway when a semi-truck swerved to avoid a careless car that had pulled out in front of it, and the lady had a single glimpse of a massive shape coming towards her. The truck slammed into her car, crushing it beyond recognition into the cement divider. When the lady's body was removed from the wreckage, the envelope was found lying beside her. It was presented to the lady's grieving parents, and inside the note contained 4 words: "You have no future." The Phantom Stagecoach of Sleepy Hollow. In the small, isolated village of Sleepy Hollow, nestled deep in the heart of old America, a chilling legend was whispered amongst the townsfolk. Every Halloween night, as the harvest moon loomed large in the sky, the ghostly stagecoach made its appearance, cloaked in darkness and driven by a headless coachman. The tale was woven into the very fabric of the town's history, passed down through generations, and known by everyone. The village itself was known for its isolation and eerie quiet, with the towering trees casting long, sinister shadows over the dark, winding roads. But on Halloween, the terror in the town reached its peak. This legend begins in the late 18th century when a wealthy, ill-tempered landowner named Orvan Brunt sought the heart of the beautiful Katrina van Tassel. His love was unrequited, and he swore vengeance against his rival, the earnest and charming schoolteacher William Crane. On that fateful Halloween night, as the townfolk all gathered for their grand party, William and Katrina shared a tender moment. Consumed by jealousy, Orvan devised a sinister plan. He donned the attire of the headless soldier who had met his gruesome end during the Revolutionary War, and he set off to intercept William as he rode home. As William traversed the dark, moonlit night on his trusty steed, the headless ghost pursued him with uncanny speed. The ghostly coachman brandished a gleaming, malevolent axe, and then there was darkness and silence. The whole village awoke to a scene of horror the next morning. William's horse returned to the village battered and bruised, but the schoolteacher himself was never found. The only evidence of his terrifying ordeal was his abandoned hat, found beside the Sleepy Hollow Bridge. And from that day forth, the legend of the Headless Horseman and the phantom stagecoach in Sleepy Hollow was born. Every Halloween night, this spectral stagecoach is said to make its return through the Sleepy Hollow Bridge. And for those who witness it, they are in for something a lot worse than a scare. And that is all we have time for. I hope you enjoyed this extra special Halloween episode, as personally Halloween is my favorite holiday of the entire year, but I hope I didn't scare too many of you too badly. Stay safe, stay curious. As always, thanks for watching, and for this episode, happy Halloween.